We are back in Genesis chapter 4, and in this video we're going to finish verse 4 and do verse 5 as well. If you recall, we're taking a look at the story of Cain and Abel, and now we're going to find out what happens with respect to the offerings they have made. Ke ep Aden hotheos, epi Abel, kai epi tois dorois altu. Epi de Kain, kai epi tais thusiais altu, pros esken. And then we'll finish here in just a minute. Well, we'll start with the subject here. So we have God is now responding. And the first verb here is ep Aden. And this is from F orao. And so you'll see there's a orao under the hood. So already with the Aden here, we'll notice that there is a spelling change. This is a third singular aorist active indicative. But you may be wondering what's going on with the kind of weird spelling of this particular verb. This is the combination of epi plus horao. And if you recall, epi, when it's followed by a vowel, will drop that I. And then the P before a vowel, in particular rough-breathed vowels, will become a phi. So that explains how we get to F horao. So that's already a spelling change, but in the aorist, it's changing to the id form anyways. So what does this word mean? Well, obviously, it's some sort of verb of looking. And if we look this up in a lexicon, I'm using Myriacus here. This is the Greek-English lexicon of Septuagint that I've introduced previously. You could just simply say this is to look upon, but in certain contexts, and I would argue that's the situation here, it's not only to just look down upon something, it's to look upon the subject's conduct favorably. And so this is a positive sense in which God is looking favorably upon something. And you'll notice that epi here is repeated. You already have it in the verb, but that's pretty common where it'll be repeated. The prepositional prefix is often reused. And in fact, he's looking upon Abel, but we see that epi repeated multiple times in these two verses. So that's kind of interesting. So God looked favorably upon Abel and upon tois dorois altu. Doron here means gift, referring back to the best of his animals that he has offered. And notice there's a personal sense. It's his gifts. Then we have epi and we have de here with reference to Cain. So I would argue this is fairly adversative. There's a contrast here. So on the one hand, God has looked favorably upon Abel, but upon Cain and upon tais thusiais altu. And so that's a dative plural feminine from thusia. This means sacrifice. Very common word, of course, in the Septuagint. And once again, it's his sacrifices, just like it was Abel's gifts. So upon Cain and upon his sacrifices, we have a negation here. He did not pros esken. This is from pros echo. And if you recall, with echo verbs in the aorist, they throw an S in there, has the prepositional prefix pros. This is going to be a third singular aorist active indicative. This means to show regard or to pay attention. And it's, I suppose in this case, kind of synonymous with the other verbs. So God does not look with any sort of regard. He does not pay heed to the sacrifices of Cain. Now, it could be because there's a qualitative difference between Cain simply just giving something of the fruits that he has, whereas Abel is offering the best and the fatty portions. But hold that thought. We're going to come to an explanation as to what the root of it is. It's also interesting that we don't really know exactly how Cain knows that God looks with a sense of disfavor, or in fact, he's just overlooking his sacrifice. But whatever the case is, here is Cain's response. Somehow he knows that God is not pleased with his offering. And so let's read the final bit here. Ke elupesen ton Cain leon, kai sun epesen to prosopo. And so what's this verb? Elupesen is from lupeo. You see a sigma here. The connecting, or the epsilon is lengthened. You have an E on the front end. So this is a third singular aorist active indicative. That's been driving all of this anyways. That means to mourn or to grieve. And notice that Cain here is in the accusative. And so the way I would probably take this is something like it grieved Cain. That is the situation in the prior scenario, the fact that God has paid no attention to his sacrifice. That grieved Cain, and Leon means greatly. And then how does he respond? Sun epesen. That's from sum pipto. Pipto means to fall. With the prepositional prefix here, the compound form means to fall greatly, to collapse, something like that. And he falls with respect to his face. And so you could translate this as he fell upon his face, although typically you would have some sort of preposition here for that. Or it could be something like he fell in his face, and maybe the way you would bring that out is his face fell, and that's going to be pretty close to the Masoretic. And so he responds with this very negative response. Now, going to a little bit further into the Bible, of course, Hebrews 11 makes a very, very important contribution to this whole scene and how the author here is unpacking what's really going on. And so in the famous Hebrews 11 Hall of Faith, we read this: "By faith, Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain, by which he was testified to be righteous, as God testified concerning his gifts." And even though the author here isn't directly citing with some sort of introductory formula any of these verses, it's very clear that he's drawing on precisely this scene. So for instance, we see thusia here, that's in Genesis 4:5. We see the gifts that we've seen already. And in fact, even this verb for offering, which you can see is some form of pharaoh with that strange spelling, we already saw that in 4:3. That this is the same basic verb that was used back then. Of course, Cain and Abel are mentioned. So clearly this is the scene. And what the author here is offering an inspired interpretation of this whole scene, where he says, look, the real difference is Abel offered his by faith, which implies that Cain did not. And so the way I would go with that is that, yes, there are external differences in what Cain offered and what Abel offered in terms of their value before the Lord, but that is radiating from a heart disposition, if you will, of faith on the one hand and lack thereof on the other. In other words, the heart state of Abel overflows in a better offering than Cain. So it's not so much the externalities of the offering that is the main decisive thing, it's the heart of faith or lack thereof that is overflowing. And so that's good for us to remember that, for instance, you can give a lot of money, but if it's not from to the church, but if it's not from a heart of faith, then it's not necessarily, just because it is money, is not necessarily going to please God. So a lot of interesting stuff here in Genesis 4, verses 4 through 5.